So now that we've established what de-risking is, first in its implicit form and then in its deliberate form, the question is, what does the critique of de-risking entail? Is it about exposing the fact that private-public partnerships are a scam and just an excuse for privatization, and so therefore we should sort of attack the very logic of de-risking? Or, considering where we are and the circumstances, we should think of a critique of de-risking as saying, well, if you want de-risking, in other words, if you want to mobilize private finance to do good while they do relatively well still, maybe you need to add what you call sticks to the carrots that exist now.
Okay, so I would say there have been two sorts of responses to my work. One is to say that the critique of de-risking that I am developing is a kind of almost a sort of vulgar Marxist account of the state subordinated to the will and the profit imperative of private finance in this case. And the second critique is, well, not all de-risking is bad, and we could design de-risking in a way that both recognizes the political limitations of transformative state projects. Not everybody can conjure up out of nowhere some kind of a new political system in which spending large amounts of public money is possible. Instead, we should think about de-risking with guardrails, right? And let me take you very quickly through these two critiques, because I think both are in some ways, the first one is a bit unfair, and the second one is probably imagining de-risking with conditions or with discipline that I'm not sure is possible. So the first one on is de-risking or a critique of de-risking simply a kind of new take on the old Marxist view that the state is basically eventually, immediately, ultimately subordinated to the interests of financial capital, that somehow the ruling class, as Fred Bloch used to put it, the ruling class does have class consciousness, it knows what it wants, and it just gets there, and it gets the state, it enrolls the state in achieving that. And I would say that's de-risking is not a totalizing project in which once the state announces that it will do de-risking and it will create partnerships with private capital, those partnerships unfold quickly, smoothly, seamlessly, and they just lead to the total privatization of social and economic life. And let me give you the example of the European Union, because I think that's a very instructive example of how de-risking can very quickly become something else, a different kind of animal, that can lead us into a very different state-capital relation. So when the European Union in 2015, under the new Jean-Claude Juncker Commission, says we can't do austerity anymore, this is fraying the social fabric in the Union, it's creating too much political tension, what we will do instead, there is a kind of move towards green capitalism of some sort. They say, okay, we need more public investment, we need more private investment, we will put these two together, public and private, in a kind of de-risking logic, and this will get us out of this austerity-driven contraction or stagnation that we find ourselves in. And as the observers and analysts point out that the kind of de-risking magic that was involved in the Juncker Commission's calculations, that they were supposed to mobilize, I don't know, to the order of 10 to 20 euros for in private capital for each euro in public money put in the project, as they call it, voodoo or magic or whatever else. The Juncker Commission responds, well, you know what? Instead of simply creating a kind of vehicle or an institution that would do de-risking and will mobilize private capital, what we will do to advance our project of green capitalism is to introduce the sustainable finance taxonomy. And the sustainable finance taxonomy is a way in which it starts within a logic of de-risking to say, how can we identify green projects where finance could invest, and how could we encourage investment in those green projects, and therefore, accelerate our climate transition, deal with the climate challenge. They didn't call it a climate crisis then. And the sustainable finance taxonomy that starts as a de-risking project, it very quickly mutates into the European states together collectively, kind of trying to create a project to discipline finance into the green priorities rather than to bribe it, because de-risking is a bribing project. It says, I need to identify how much subsidies or regulatory or fiscal I need to give this project or this sector or this financier in order for them to invest. But in the sustainable finance taxonomy and then in the Green New Deal project of the European Commission, what we see is that de-risking mutates into a state discipline project as the high-level expert group that the European Commission puts together, which was mostly but not exclusively made of financiers, says, well, we should have a green supporting factor, which is a technical term for de-risking particular sets of assets or of green assets. Besides this green supporting factor, we should have a brown penalizing factor. And this is where you see one of the most important political struggles between the state and private finance unfolding in the age of the new Wall Street consensus. It's a struggle that features not just BlackRock, although BlackRock is kind of, because it's by then is the largest global asset manager, is the largest financial institution in the world. We're all keeping track of what BlackRock does, so it's much more visible. But BlackRock, European banking lobby, the European capital markets lobby, everybody is lobbying very hard, because all of a sudden the European states are saying, we should discipline private capital into our climate priorities. We should create a framework in which if they choose to lend to dirty activities, we will penalize them. We will make it more expensive. We will bring sticks alongside carrots, right? And this project lasts for, I would say, in some weaker form or increasingly weakened form until the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which completely flips in many ways the political priorities of both the European Commission and the political power and the lobbying power of a private finance. But we had, let's say, 4 or 5 years in which de-risking threatened to become a strong state project that disciplined capital, and that said one way to get the trillions of institutional investors, like the pension funds from the US or the pension funds from the Netherlands or from Denmark, one way to get them into climate investment is to give them bribes, is to de-risk. The other way is to basically punish them if they invest in dirty activities, and that's, you get automatic reallocations because it's much more expensive to go there. And then the European Central Bank does the same, and sometimes I joke that the European Central Bank is probably the most it's an embryonic but the most visible example of a green central planner that we've had since 2008, because the European Central Bank said, I don't need the taxonomy, I don't need to think about the brown penalizing factor, I'm going to do my own thing. And my own thing would be, looks like I'm going to penalize the issuers of dirty corporate bonds, that are financing dirty activities, and I'm going to design a framework for doing so. And it did it for 9 months between 2022 and 2023. So we have all this, realignments or escapes or redirections of de-risking projects into something more state-driven. It's not necessarily that the state always starts with de-risking and ends with de-risking. There are possible political other political trajectories possible. As to can we do sticks and carrots at the same time? To me, de-risking is fundamentally inconsistent with sticks and carrots framework, in the sense that the premise of partnership between the state and private capital is a premise of, I take risks, you invest, but I put you in the driving seat. This is how I think about de-risking: is you put private capital in the driving seat, you establish the direction of travel, as in you're saying, okay, I'm going to de-risk for these sectors or for these activities or for these infrastructure asset classes or for these industries in the Inflation Reduction Act. That's the direction of travel, but you're in the driving seat. You put I don't know, let's not use fossil fuels. You put electricity in it. You decide the speed at which you go. I will just subsidize some bits of it, but private capital is in the driving seat. And the moment we start to think about carrots and sticks, we have to think about the state in the driving seat. And when the state is in the driving seat, to me, it's not just it offers carrots at the beginning of a project in order to change risk-adjusted returns for the private investor. But the sticks framework is fundamentally different because it requires the state to constantly monitor the performance of the investors that it supports against some strategic priorities. So I would say it's inconsistent. De-risking is not a political project that can easily accommodate the kinds of sticks that are necessary for transformative state projects. And that's why, to me, the Biden administration, although it triggered some increase in manufacturing investment in the United States, it was never going to be a viable counter project to the Chinese state-led industrial policy. The Biden administration still had a private capital-led de-risking project in industrial policy. Having said that, I also sometimes, as a policy advisor, wear a hat of pragmatism, and there is a hat of pragmatism for countries in the global south that says there should be certain sectors where you could do let's call it some kind of developmental de-risking. For example, in the energy sector or in energy investment, I would say mostly I would kind of bracket or isolate social goods like education, health. Those social infrastructure should always be publicly funded, publicly owned, publicly invested. But there are certain sectors like energy where you could think about, or like climate investments where you could think about creating some kinds of conditionalities and some kinds of small sticks for investors, because you have technological and financial dependencies that you cannot simply overturn in the life of one political cycle, and then you can say, okay, I will try to mobilize private finance, but it's going to be an attempt to be a more equal relationship, where not only where we are distributing profits fairly, where it's not just that I'm assuming the risks and you get the return. So there could be some there could be some areas of de-risking where a combination of sticks and carrots might work. Besides the energy sector, the energy investments, particularly renewable energies, is probably one where I would reluctantly agree that given the constraints that countries in the global south have, we could do that. With my colleague Ndongo Sambasila from Senegal, we worked on Namibia's attempts to create a green hydrogen sector through de-risking, that is through taking some of the risks from private equity and investors and German renewable green hydrogen experts. And what we argue there is, okay, if you do de-risking for this green hydrogen sector, if it gives you significant foreign exchange resources, but they have to be paired with a very clear, elaborate industrial strategy in which you create forwards and backwards linkages with the green hydrogen, with de-risk green hydrogen, and you use some of the revenues from there in order to support your local economy, in order to do industrial upgrading. So it could be used in conjunction or together with industrial policy strategies, but never just as the vehicle for industrial policy.
We won't get into it now, but the problem, there's an extra problem with the Namibia project, which we touched on when we interviewed Eyal Weizmann is that the government of Namibia, in going on with this project, is also using it in part to sort of cover up and negate the Nama and Ovaherero genocide of the early 20th century. So that's an extra problem. We won't get there.